Okay, I believe it has turned just past the hour. So I would like to welcome everyone who's tuned in live, also everyone who's going to be watching or listening to this afterwards. This is the first webinar of the year from Submer, our 11th all in all. It seems like it's been an absolute age since we did the last one, and I know it was just before Christmas, and everyone thinks, wow, that was a short while ago, but to me at the moment it seems like so much has happened since then. So we've got a real treat in store today. We are the United Nations of faces and people who are taking part. I'm going to introduce everyone, but we really are represented from many countries. We have France, Russia, US/UK, Italy, Ireland, and then, you know, all of you guys as well on the other side. So thanks all very much. So just very briefly, just introduce you to myself, anyone who doesn't know me. My name is Dymyd. Everyone calls me D. I look after the commercial part here of the business at Submer. And of course, you can reach out to me at any stage. However, just reminding you, there's been a lot of great content over the last 11 months, and also some other videos and articles and everything. So not only through the Submer website, but also through all of the channels, our YouTube channel. You can listen to any of these also on Spotify, or you can catch them on other platforms. So, you know, please, for anyone that you may have missed, there has been some great content. And I would advise anyone who's missed any of the episodes to go back and take a good look at that. All right, so just a little formal piece here. Everyone can at any stage use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of the window in which you're taking part. So please, as we're going along, please feel free to jot in your questions, anything you'd like to ask the panelists here, anything you'd like to ask me. Even if you'd like to ask Matteo something, please put it in there. He's very happy to share the name of his hairdresser with you and lots of other things here, so that's all good. Apart from that, let's go straight on and introduce then our first guest. Lesya, thank you so much for having joined us today. And I'm not going to read this all for verbatim. Anyone who's really interested can have a look later on at your profile, but very impressive person, very impressive background with a PhD in management. And I know that you're looking after innovation as well, like internal innovation, and you have been the EU regional lead for OCP for a while. So thank you very much. Anything you'd care to add for any of our listeners?
What you should know about is that I'm very passionate about the innovation and helping companies to innovate and advance in their technological innovation. I'm also given some lectures at the university, and I love reading business books.
Okay, nice one. Thank you. Moving on to Mr. Adrien Badina. So Adrien, hi, welcome as well.
Oh, thank you.
Adrien is the CIO at 2CRSI, so based out of Strasbourg as well, just like Lesya. I know that Adrien, you've had a large career in the IT industry, and I know also you are also very innovation focused, and I believe you will be having a little bit more to do with OCP personally over the next while.
Yeah, that's right. Handling the OCP presence of 2CRSI on Open Compute projects. Okay,
great. And last but not least, we come to Mr. Steve Helvie, who normally needs no introduction whatsoever. He's recognizable both from his stature and also by his very impressive track record. And I know, Steve, you've just returned this morning back from Singapore. I'm sure you're jet lagged to bits, but thank you very much as well for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Excellent. My pleasure. And you today are going to really share the following with us. You're going to tell us what you're going to talk about.
Yeah, great. So thanks to the entire team at Submer and 2CRSI for allowing me to share a few ideas today. First thing I'm going to start off with is sharing a little bit about background on what is the Open Compute Project. And the Open Compute Project started in 2011 This is an announcement from 2010 when Facebook announced that they were going to start building their own data centers. And at that time, they were outgrowing their current infrastructure and looking to work directly with the manufacturer. Now, large companies working directly with a manufacturer for their hardware needs is not new or different. What is new or different is that when Facebook finished these designs, they decided to open source them to the world. So now we have an open source hardware community. Facebook was in this unique position where if they were going to start building their own data centers and doing all their own hardware, they started asking very open-ended questions. What can we get rid of within the system? Can we operate things at a higher temperature? Do we need centralized power? All of these were the building blocks for this technical nonprofit that they started around the Open Compute Project. The 5 board members, Facebook, Microsoft, Goldman Sachs, Rackspace, and Intel, along with Andy Beckelsheim, created the Open Compute Project, where now we have over 200 companies working together to solve common problems across, say, 15 projects, 6,000 engineers, and close to 200 contributions. We work based on a project, very similar to, say, something like the Linux Foundation, where they have working groups and projects. We're similar, where we have data center oriented projects around networking, server storage, telco, advanced cooling. Each one of these projects is led by a volunteer and they get voted on by the community. So if you're a member of the community, you can run for one of these particular project leads and you can start to manage that entire working group. There's a lot of effort that goes into the types of designs that people are contributing, the types of ideas that are shared between consumer, vendor, across the IT spectrum. You get an enormous amount of intellectual horsepower across these projects. The idea behind working together as a group to increase the pace of innovation is at the cornerstone of Open Compute. And to share a little bit more about innovation and how 2CRSI and the importance of innovation that it plays in their company, I want to turn it back over to Lesya to share a little bit more.
Yes, thank you, Steve. So I've been personally involved in the management of open innovation, both from the perspectives of the company, organization, and also being an active member of the community. And today I would like to share some of my perspective on this, why it's important for the companies and what you can draw as a lessons from all this experience. First of all, I would like to speak about the basics. So what are the definition of the open innovation and why it's important? So in the literature, open innovation is defined as the usage of the knowledge that come outside and inside from the company that organization can use in order to improve its position on the current market, or in order to use this knowledge, new knowledge, in order to enter into the existing into the new markets. So basically, there is this combination between ongoing inflows of knowledge that comes and goes out from the company, but also the creation for the existing and new markets. And there is an executive report on managing of open innovation in large companies that has been made by researchers from the House School of Business, the UC Berkeley, that says that 70% of firms of large organizations practicing open innovation. And when we speak about who are those members, who are those actors and partners for these open innovation ecosystems, we see that these are the customers, these are the suppliers, but also the university. So open innovation help us allow to coordinate, organize the knowledge in order to create something with our customers and get involved in collaborations with universities, partners, and suppliers. Another important question is that we should ask ourselves why it's important, why open innovation is important for any organization, and what would be the benefits for us. So there are several strategic objectives for the reasons why we should care about the open innovation. But here I would like to draw your attention specifically to a couple of those. So first of all, to my mind, is that establishing new partnerships could be vital, because when you're operating in the open community, you have the access to the large companies, but also small and medium-sized companies. So basically you can address the challenges, you can bring to the table the challenges and discuss it with companies of different size. But also you might find the partner with whom you have the same interest, either expand your market or current market, or go and penetrate into new markets. The second word for me is really focus on innovation. And here we see the exploration of new trends, searching for new opportunities and new business model innovation. So this has to deal with management of innovation. And the third one, which is quite important and that you should also stress, that I would like you to stress attention to, is acceleration with your R&D processes. Optimization of R&D, lowering cost, faster development, and more rapid access to markets would be the advantages why you should properly manage your open innovation in the firm. Another important issue that any organization and managers or people involved in open innovation should care about is the best practices that organization can do. So there are formal and informal practices that can help you to manage open innovation ecosystem and partnerships. And one of them is open innovation cultures. Here we see the norms, values, and beliefs. An important factor is that any innovation, and specifically those that has to deal with open cultures, open innovation, has to be supported by the top management. And it's better if an organization has a sponsor that would be helping and allocating resources if you need to deal with open innovation. The second important practices would be formalization of operational activities and procedures, which means that you need to have documented processes, you need to have some procedures that your teams and your management can follow through and coordinate and see how they can be efficient on the daily or weekly operations. And finally, in order to understand if our activities are effective and efficient, we need to have some metrics and KPI. And here I would like to tell you a little bit more about that on the next slide. So how can we in fact understand that the open innovation, the management of open innovation is efficient and we are doing well? So basically there is some metrics, there are metrics and KPIs that can help us identify whether we are doing a good job. And among those are external innovation contributions for R&D projects, which means basically how was the impact from the collaborations or from any other feedback that we received in these open communities, and that has to deal with the development of our R&D projects. If we are talking more economic and business perspectives, here we will speak about the cost-benefit evaluation. So the cost-benefit analysis will help us to understand how much did we invest and what was the revenues, specifically on the sales from this product that we developed within these partnerships or projects in open innovation. And finally, we can also take a look on the trends that we identified, the ideas that we decided to pursue, or a number of patents that granted or has been utilized in their projects. What I would like to mention over here is that according to the research, all these metrics and KPIs has to be developed specifically to any particular company. So basically you can use this as some insights in your organizations, but every time when you want to assess your open innovation management, you will need to develop your own KPIs based on your own resources, based on the situation in your company and in your business environment, on the markets, and also based on your available resources, competences, and skills. Again, these are only some proposals for the KPI, and you will need to develop your own if you want to understand if you are doing well in the open innovation ecosystems. There are also some initiatives established, for example, by the OCP, where you can benefit from partners of different kinds. And I would like to Steve that you will speak a little bit more about this.
Yeah, thanks, Lesya. This is an initiative. This is our second full year of running an OCP symposium. It's really targeted for academia, industry, venture capitalists, analyst firm to all come together around 4 different areas to do brand new research type of open hardware component designs or reference architectures. So while OCP itself is working on current designs and products that actually go to market, this is the top of the funnel, or what the R&D or the academic institutions might be working together. But what's different, rather than just making it an R&D pet project, is that they're actually working alongside member organizations and companies. So you can see right here a few of the examples around University of Toronto, Alibaba, UC Berkeley, etc. And this will all be taking place at the OCP Summit in March 3rd in San Jose, California. So again, this is our third symposium. We started this exactly a year ago, so this will be our second full year, and we're expecting more and more of these type of symposiums to show off the incoming funnel of interesting new architectures.
How do people take part, Steve? Do they need to register, or they just jump in, or what's the story?
They can go online to opencompute.org and they will find symposium links, or feel free to reach out to me at steve@opencompute.org, and I'm happy to start pointing them in the right direction.
Great, thank you.
I would like to add that for all participants of the global summit, the participation in the OCP is free. So if you plan to attend the global summit, you can come and attend the symposium for free.
It's great. Thank you, Lesya. So I want to spend just a little bit more time around the key objective and the key message today. It's the speed at which you can work together in an open environment, and the impact that it has on your business from each angle, whether you're an end user, a vendor, an analyst, a VC. Working in an open community has significant benefits. So what makes an open source community slightly different than, say, a standards organization or a multi-party sourcing agreement? On the left-hand side, you have a bunch of vendors getting together and writing a spec and saying, all right, we're gonna write this spec, and then it could vary in the type of adoption. On the right-hand side, you have the multi-party sourcing agreement saying, all right, we're all gonna pool our buying power, we're all gonna buy the same model of this. However, you may limit the number of manufacturers that are willing to join this multi-party sourcing agreement. So you still may be limited to, say, one vendor in many cases. So what happens within an open source project, whether this be software or hardware, is you have consumers and producers working together that then become kind of a de facto standard, because you're working on things on the front end faster than you can on either side of this equation. A bit about the OCP market, just so you understand the numbers that we're talking about. There's an analyst firm that tracks OCP revenue. Between now and, say, 2021, you're looking at close to $6 billion. Now, this only includes non-hyperscale numbers. So when you include that, it's significantly more. But to give you a sense of the enterprise numbers, large enterprise only, we're looking at $6 billion over the next couple of years. You can see the aggregated growth rate here, but APAC is heavily weighted toward North Asia. And when it comes to segments, you're going to see on the right-hand side, this is 100% of the market. Gray is the enterprise. You have service providers on the hyperscale, telco, and tier 2 CSPs. The growth is going to be happening in that lime green and light blue area, which is the telco cloud service provider. And I'll get into why that's happening here in a little bit. But this just gives you a sense of the growth of the market, who's going to be looking at this type of new architecture. And sure, numbers are great. We all like to see fancy growth numbers moving up, but what is really driving these type of behavioral characteristics at the market level? Well, one of them is efficiency. There are more and more companies that are really interested in the type of power efficiency they can get at the IT hardware level. So here is a perfect example. SK Telecom out of Korea did some tests, 3 different racks in a colo environment, running 3 different types of workloads. You can see what OCP efficiency does at 0% and 100% compared to, say, legacy or OEM style network, compute, and storage servers. So pretty impressive numbers from SK. And this has been validated by another significantly large ISP out of Japan as well, where they're seeing close to 30% at 0, and even more so than 20% at 100% of workload. But it's not just the IT hardware that's running more efficient. One of the benefits of open compute is your engineering resources are a great deal more efficient. It comes to the serviceability, the manpower you need, the overall effectiveness of your team. On the right-hand side, these are some time studies that Yahoo Japan has done, and they've been working on this new type of architecture for 3+ years now. So they have a really good data set to work with. This is not just a one-off POC. The orange, you can see a traditional legacy hardware. The light blue indicates OCP. And they've timed this across replacing different components, serviceability, and you can see the metrics there. 40% less time. They've actually decreased their headcount and been able to reallocate that to a software head, and some pretty interesting metrics there. Again, so efficiency at the IT level, efficiency at the engineering resource level. A couple other examples about how the community is solving problems. These are examples out of Europe, ING Bank in Poland. You'll see pervasive themes: reduction in TCO, reduction in OpEx. The London Internet Exchange, running a disaggregated network model. They're disaggregating the network switch from the software, allowing for a great deal more flexibility than proprietary hardware and software combinations. And EDF, which is one of the largest utilities in France, starting to use open compute, just testing at this particular time for blockchain and GPU. There are many, many other examples out there, but these are just 3 areas or 3 examples of how people are starting to leverage this new technology. So with new business models comes new challenges. You know, OCP is since 2011, but really over the last 3 or 4 years, it's started to move its way into the enterprise. And without the right, there are a lot of innovations out there that without the right ecosystem behind it, it struggles. And in preparation for this webinar, I did come across some pretty interesting innovations, which I'm not surprised have not taken off. For example, the umbrella with an already built-in goggle, that seems to be a pretty flawed business model, or perhaps a tie with a flask built in for the beverage of your choice, or perhaps you have a greedy coworker and you want to deter them from stealing your lunch. You can get these plastic bags that already have mold on them. And last, my favorite, which is the new kitchen bird feeder. So again, interesting innovations, but certainly lacking in many of the areas where you would need to be successful in the market. Now, OCP is far from these examples, but we still have our challenges. You know, we need open source, community-minded partners and end users. So without those, we end up, again, siloed, not working together. A new business model like OCP requires a different support model. And I think you can talk to the people at Submer and 2CRSI about how that support model differs from, say, the traditional OEM model. We need to make it easier for people to try this new technology. And lastly, we need to make sure that these technologies have enterprise class workloads and proven. So how are we approaching this? What's big for 2020? Well, there are a few things. One is, I'll give you an example, the Open Accelerator Infrastructure. This is a project within Open Compute. It was started by one company that said, I'm going to start working on this problem. I have this problem. I want to know more about GPUs. I need to work more on GPUs. So they put it out to the community. Microsoft and Baidu raised their hand and said, I want to work on the same problem together. And within 8 months, these are the companies that have joined this effort. It's been our fastest growing community effort. And the folks at Submer, I know, work very closely with a lot of these companies in fine-tuning their solution. So again, pace of engineering, we're already seeing some of the output from this type of group effort. So accelerators is certainly one of the big initiatives heading into 2020. Here's exactly what they're working on within the OAI project. Everything from security, to the chassis, the mechanicals, the cooling, and even beyond the chassis. So with more information, you can certainly join that link there and take a look at some of the details behind this project, but pretty interesting stuff. The second big area, some people have called it hyper, some people call it aggregated, some people call it empowered. I've heard a lot of different definitions or adjectives followed by the word edge. So depending on who you talk to, they have a different idea of what edge actually is. One of the more interesting articles that I've read lately is around how Walmart is looking at this. Now, you wouldn't think of Walmart as looking at 5G and edge so much, but one of the amazing facts that I did not know is that this article claims that 90% of America lives within a 15-kilometer radius of a Walmart. I find that number extremely high. That would mean close to 300 million people are within 15 kilometers of a Walmart. Think of the real estate that Walmart has, think about the extra space they may have, and think of the micro edge data centers that they could then start to become. Facilities, mind you, whether it be a warehouse or a stock room that may not be optimized for the data center, but perfect for, say, a design like what Submer does, where you don't necessarily need a full-on blown data center, but you can actually take an edge-oriented solution like what Submer works on. So pretty amazing use case, and I think you're going to see more of this as edge becomes this broader definition of a broad term that we use around describing a type of technology similar to the way we use organic at the grocery store. You're going to see different use cases. But the base of this, by the way, will still need an entirely new set of software applications that are going to run on this. Here's some of the work that we're already doing on the edge. This is a contribution from Nokia. Ultra small footprint. They're already rolling this out in POC concept, full NEBS compliance. Down on the right-hand side, Nokia submitted this product for recognition a few months ago. We already have 3 other manufacturers that are ready to sign up to make this exact thing, because they're taking that specification, taking it to market, and being a multi-source vendor strategy for the edge. Speed to market for the vendor by working together. Another edge solution is around a carrier-grade rack for a software-defined enabled broadband access. These are 2 members that have worked together along with OCP and the Open Networking Foundation to harden this box for edge carrier-grade telcos. It's something that we're going to see more and more of with the third big bucket, which is better together. There are so many organizations out there that people can join. Open source organizations on the software side, on the hardware side, industry organizations. Each one of these organizations, if you join them, you need to develop a headcount, or you need to dedicate time, resources, and money. This gets to be very stressful for organizations when they can't join everything, but they want to still participate. So I think in 2020, you're going to see a lot more of these organizations work together for common licensing strategies, common contribution frameworks, to make it easier on companies and faster for companies to contribute. So they're not working on one organization for one product, another organization for a very similar product, 2 different licensing agreements, a lot of different paperwork. Here are just a few. Open UK, I do want to call that out. That's a new organization in the UK that is focused on driving open source software, hardware, infrastructure across the UK government. And we have a colleague from Open Compute who's actually sitting on the board of that organization. How we're working with an organization such as Telco Infrastructure Project, which is an organization that Facebook started that involves all the telco grade efforts. This is our very first design where we had Edge Core Networks, which is an ODM for network switch, developed one common spec with carriers across both organizations. It went through both organizations at the same time, and we now have an open cell site router. Maximizing their resources, maximizing ours to deliver really strong results to the market quickly. The next big bucket is integrated solutions. As I mentioned, all this needs software to run on. Every time I talk with a company, I ask them why they're interested in doing this type of hardware. It always boils down to the workload. They want to run new, interesting open source software on hardware, on the open hardware. When you think about a cloud service provider such as Uber, most of these people are going to have a multi-hybrid cloud approach. They're going to have some in a public cloud, maybe one or two offerings in a public cloud, but they're going to want to have a private cloud strategy. And they want that private cloud to look and feel just like their public cloud. So if the big public cloud providers, Facebook, Microsoft, Google, are all using this type of new hardware, people are going to want their private cloud to have that same look and feel. And that's what you get out of an open source organization. Another pretty good example is what Deutsche Telekom, or Deutsche Bank did rather, and the fact that they're revamping all of their applications now. When they're building it, everything has to be cloud enabled. So they're not just re-architecting new applications, they're rebuilding and building brand new applications. And those are going to need to run on less hardware than they previously did. So you're no longer running VMs, you're running a distributed, disaggregated model, cloud native, which means less hardware, but you can also commoditize that hardware, such as these new open designs. So how does this play into open compute? We're working tirelessly now with all of our members, such as 2CRSI, to put together these integrated solutions, making sure you have a full rack of proven OCP hardware that's running proven Hadoop, Kubernetes, OpenStack, and Docker. We actually have members now that are out delivering these rack level solutions. You're not going to find this from the manufacturers themselves. We're going to rely on our service providers to help validate those stacks. And the last bucket I wanted to touch on is the circular economy. This here is a graph from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And if you haven't seen some of their work, I encourage you to go onto Ellen MacArthur Foundation's website. They are some of the pioneers around what is a circular economy. And I do want to call out this area here around designing out waste and pollution. The larger companies now are sitting down with manufacturers and thinking about reuse when they actually want to manufacture and design something. And we're doing that within Open Compute now through Open Systems Firmware, which is in the past, a firmware, the software that comes with the server, has been proprietary. What we have done now through Open Systems Firmware is we've open sourced that firmware, where now at the design phase, servers that are designed with open source firmware are easily reused to the secondary market at scale. And this is a big deal. As of 2021, all servers that are coming through Open Compute will have to have open source firmware. It's a big, big deal in the community. A couple other things, the EU is very aggressive on making sure there's an environmental impact. This is a legislation that was passed earlier this year around the efficiency needed for servers at idle. Most servers sit at idle. There'll now be efficiency requirements in the EU around how efficient a server sits at idle. Additionally, the CED ACI, which is the Circular Economy for a Data Center Industry project, has kicked off. Across the EU, you'll have different sub-projects figuring out what is the best way to handle the circular economy for the data center within the EU. And I think the first focus of this project is going to be around servers only, because you can get very, very broad very quickly. So they're fine-tuning this for the server piece only. This is how we're looking at the circular economy. All of these hyperscalers use an enormous number of servers. And I encourage you, when this is posted, to check out Ali Fenn's keynote from our summit speech in Amsterdam in 2019 in September, where she goes through in detail this entire market around end-of-life servers and all of the servers that are coming out of the hyperscalers. What's great about Open Compute is this company here, IT Renew, has taken this model and been able to recertify it using Open Systems Firmware and some other technical expertise to then move that into the secondary market. And this is an emerging market opportunity. These are secondary life with still an enormous amount of life left in these racks. And we're seeing this deployed at scale across Europe and starting in Asia as well as Africa. So we're excited about our participation in the circular economy. We think we can play a pretty big role in that as a foundation. So just to summarize, these are the big bets: accelerators, edge, working better together, the need for integrated solutions in circular economy. And this is one of my favorite quotes. I think that in the past, it's really been the vendors that have conditioned the consumers when they need infrastructure. And the consumers just arbitrarily say, yeah, I'm gonna go with the traditional because they've been conditioned that way. But there's a new wave of customers that are ringing a different kind of bell. And that bell is hopefully going to recondition some of the vendors to think differently. And there are members here on the call today. Submer and 2CRSI are good examples of members that are kind of answering that bell to this new wave of customer infrastructure. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dymyd, and thanks again to the team at 2CRSI and Submer for the opportunity.
No, thanks a million, Steve. And just again to remind everyone, this is an opportunity to ask any questions, anything you like. A couple of things have popped up during that, during those great thoughts that you both shared. Thank you very much. But I'd like to just ask Mr. Adrien something, if you don't mind. Like from our side, from a Submer side, like OCP has really been amazing for us, and I can't say enough about it. One of the biggest issues we have had, however, is of course being able to dedicate enough resources to the OCP space, because every time we feel, wow, you know, we want to achieve so much, we just want to do more. But what it has especially done for us is the ability with our innovation, where there are parts of it that we rely upon, which are not necessarily core or key to us, which we can easily go to OCP partners, and the willingness of people to jump in and to help solve those is unbelievable. But maybe, Adrien, like, have there been any issues on your side with the dedication of resources? How have you felt about that?
It's a good question. So on our side, we went on the OCP size server due to the fact that we tried to understood better the needs of one customer who first inquire us 500 server, standard one in 19-inch. And due to the mining issue 3 years ago, no GPU were available for the delay. He asked us, he said that he needs the 500 server in 3 weeks. Usually it's totally possible to do in standard server. And we said, no, it's not possible to ship that. And he goes to a standard manufacturer. We said yes, but finally this manufacturer had 9 weeks of delay, so more than 2 months. So he came back to us and asked and said, okay, I need more than 500 server, I need 1,000 server, what can you do? So we said, okay, guy, you know, you take 1,000 server, you need 2 power supply by server, you need, there is a lot of fans, perhaps we can see something different. So we tried we put all the R&D group on this project to create new kind of server based on the OCP form factor to reach the needs of the customer. So for us, it's a possibility to create with the maximum amount of space we have in the 19-inch server to create new kind of solutions, because in one space of one OpenU, we put sometimes more than one motherboard. So, and we try to go deep in the needs of the customer. So it takes time, it takes people to think about that and to create solutions, to innovate on that. We used to have some connector, traditional connector, you know, coming from the power bar at the end of the rack, and with some cables, and it was long, it was very costly to ship them, and there is some manual operation. So we create a new kind of connector. It's one of our contribution to the OCP. And this connector enable us to have very quickly some PDB, power distribution board, to put the power inside the server. So this is a part of the, how can I say, it's electronics departments here who do that. So other people need to be focused on a new way of thinking the server, and we need sometimes to have different kind of ideas, so to innovate. But one thing I can do, we need to convince customer that it's a good idea. Because as Steve said, Pavlov is here, and a lot of them only believe in 19-inch server, also because they paid the support of the server. So they need to understand that there is other way to go, and it's good for everybody, for them, for us, for the Earth, because as Steve said also, and as I said just before during a presentation, on the rack, when you have a rack, you don't change the power supply when you change the server. You just swap the server. So you keep your power supply as long as they are working. When you remove an existing server, you remove two power supply because they are inside the server in a 19-inch. And if you put a new 19-inch server, sometimes it's not the same power supply. So you will, and you cannot buy a server without power supply inside. So it's good for everybody that working in this way. And we believe that this vision of the IT is a really good one.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're huge fans of OCP as well. Also, you know, because of the simplicity, the fact that it reduces the number of cables, the fact that it's just much more efficient and you can get higher densities, everything like that. And I know we're working together with you and with others to also look at creating much denser OpenU servers, etc. One other question that came up, Lesya, was if you could share any specifics of some companies' KPIs with regards to innovation, just to give people an example. You know, I know it's individual for every single company, but you know, I'm sure you might be able to give us some kind of an example of some, let's say, healthy balance of the investment in R&D, etc.
Yeah, I would say everything will depend on the purpose and objective that you are looking for. So, for example, if you want to increase your operational efficiency, or if you want to increase your financial results, you will need to base your metrics based on the objective that you want to attain. But if we are speaking on the very broad terms, I would say that it will be investments done in the R&D projects and collaborations with partners, and also the impact analyzed based on the cost and benefits analysis based for the 1 year, for example. So I would look for the projects, I will look for the quality of partnerships and how did you manage, what was the result of these partnerships, either it's a new commercial projects or it's a new development, R&D projects, R&D developments. And any other would be more on intangible, would be the number of exploited and explored ideas or insights. If for any other KPI, you can refer to me. I'll be happy to provide more information on the specific KPIs or measurements for companies. Yes, but basically you will focus on the tangible and intangible KPIs and measurements.
Okie dokie. Steve, you mentioned regarding ING, and you mentioned, I think it was a 30% saving on CapEx, yeah?
Yes.
This was obviously moving from maybe a more traditional OEM to an ODM, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, so that's the kind of thing. Yeah, we have some questions here I'd like us also to address. Do we have any examples on government open source infrastructure strategies and how OCP is helping? Steve, I guess that's to you.
Yeah, there are a couple that one has been a long time deployment at the Department of Energy in America. So they have most of their HPC efforts all run open compute, and that includes Los Alamos in New Mexico. So that is one of the they've been using open compute now, I think, well over 4 years. The other piece that we're seeing is some early initiatives out of Singapore for some test beds to start to look at this tropical data center. And they like some of the, that fits well with the OCP nodes because they're able to operate at a slightly higher temperature. One of the more impressive examples is in the Nordics, there's currently an initiative underway to as they work on their G Cloud, OCP will be specified in a portion of that. And those will be specific hardened OCP accepted servers, storage, and networking. So the Nordics seem to be leading when it comes to the European G Cloud. And then I would anticipate with my colleague John Laban's help at the Open UK, that the UK government will be soon to follow, because that entire team understands the need for open hardware as they pull through all of this open software as well. So again, in America, it's been primarily on the Department of Energy. In Singapore, it's still very, very early days, and I don't see anything out of North Asia yet, even on the state-owned enterprises. But in Europe, and like most eco-efficiency initiatives, I anticipate Europe will surpass anything happening in the other regions quickly.
Okay, I mean, you know, I know there's a project that we also worked on together with 2CSI also, which was also a public body in Europe. So
that's right. Yes.
You know, these kind of things are great, and it's easy to convince people when it comes to the crunch if you have real tangible benefits that you can demonstrate. And of course, it also depends on their, let's say, willingness or on their trust regarding the hardware vendors that they're normally so locked into. So I think that's also been very interesting.
Yeah, and I do think that Europe is fortunate to have as many active members within Open Compute. Most people think that this is a heavily weighted US, North American driving all this technology. That is absolutely not the case. We've had significant growth year over year in current companies that are based and headquartered in Europe, driving some of these projects, especially in some of the more interesting areas such as advanced cooling. So Europe is certainly showing its intellectual horsepower across OCP.
Nice to hear. Obviously, you know, OCP is international, and also it feels very international too, even though most of the hyperscalers are based out of the US. But still, you know, we do feel that there's also quite a lot of room for contributions, even as smaller parties.
Yep.
But maybe just a last question to Adrien and to Lesya regarding the open source firmware. And is this something that you're already doing, or that you have that you're planning on doing?
Lesya, can I answer perhaps?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
So, what I know today, it's I heard about that some weeks or months ago, but nothing is directly in place today. Some of the component we include in our rack is completely open, and for example, the fan board who managed the small board who managed the fan, it was completely redeveloped by one of our customers to manage things more precisely with development, in-house development from the side. So on our side, we don't want to close things. Regarding the motherboards, it's sometimes more difficult because one things we do in 2CSI, it's using more standard motherboard than having specific motherboards. Standard motherboard going in 19-inch are not obliged to be completely open. So perhaps, and I'm sure we'll go on this way and push some manufacturer to do things to be able to implement those boards in our server.
Yeah, I'm sure Steve, John, and team will be able to help as well with the flexing of muscles in the direction of some of the larger US brands as well of motherboard manufacturers, etc. Absolutely. Steve, just one last question for you regarding the challenges around the circular economy, because it's all well and good, but like how useful is the hardware really when it rolls around, considering that many years of innovation have passed by the time it's going to its new home?
There is a pervasive thought that anything that I'm buying secondhand is not as good or has already kind of been through its paces. It's safe to say that these hyperscalers are getting rid of racks of gear, sometimes even less than 3 years old. If an IT company uses their gear, I was just in Singapore meeting with a company, they use their equipment much longer than even 7 years. So now you're looking at an additional, on a conservative side, 3, upside 5 additional years. And one partner of the circular economy put it best. It said, look, this has already been burn tested. This has already been tested and used for 2 or 3 years. So there's this diminishing returns or parts failure ratio that decreases actually with some of this second user gear. The companies that have been using this, and they've been using it now for a couple of years, have continued to use it. And what's happened is they may start off with second user to run some workloads, and then they move over to new hardware for additional workloads. Much the same way that you're going to run a hybrid environment where you're going to have some things still legacy gear running on VMware, and then you're going to run the new hardware for new applications in a public cloud. This is just one of those areas or one of the avenues that you fill your infrastructure. So in some cases, people use it 100%, but in most cases, people are running a hybrid environment.
Okay. We have 2 final questions and then we're going to close it down. First of all, what impact could the EU's new regulations about idle server efficiency have on Submer? This is really one for the hardware manufacturers, really. The new regulations about idle server efficiency. I believe it's 10%, isn't it?
That I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I'm almost sure. I'm sure that John Laban would be able to jump in a heartbeat in this. Basically, like the impact on Submer is that if we're talking about 19-inch hardware, which has these individual power supplies, or the AB power supplies, of course, them running at 10% means that they're just going to be more efficient, and they're not running at 40%, which is sometimes the figure which both base power supplies have to be running at in order that if one fails, the other can take the full load without causing too much of a spike. But I'm sure from the OCP standard, because already we're at a very, very much more efficient way, because it's normally power shelves or power rectifiers which are used, which have multiple power supplies, and they just run in an N+1 configuration, which is much more sensible than every single server having an additional power supply. So in that case there, I believe they're already well at the or well under the new regulations requirements at this stage. Because they only have to replace the workings of one other power supply. So you may have 9, and then if one fails, this hot spare or whatever just has to jump in for that one. So it will not be running at 100% the whole time. It will be running at a much lower percentage. So also, because it's only 1 out of 9 or 1 out of 8, it's much easier to cover that deficit. And the last question here, is it true that new OCP open accelerators have a common socket on the universal baseboard? This I'm also interested in. Steve.
That would be a great question for our technical project leads. So I apologize to the person that asked that, but I do not know the answer to that, but I can happily find it out.
I think what we'll do right there is that, as you said, take it with you. You can supply the answer to that question, please, to Matteo, who will also post the answer to that when we post this recording on YouTube and on some other channels. What it remains to say is to say thank you so much, Adrien, Lesya, Steve, Matteo, and everybody who's tuned in. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your interest, your time, and just thank you so much, everybody, for preparing for this too. See you all next time, and see you all very soon in San Jose, I presume.
That's right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.